Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show. We're sitting down today with preeminent economist Dr. Walter Block. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I don't know about the preeminent, but I'm happy to be with you.
Pleasure's all mine. So there's a lot of news that is coming at us on the economic front. Is there anything that you're looking at from an Austrian lens, or is being an Austrian, is there anything that pops out at you?
We should end the Fed. It's not bloody likely um, because what was it? The red wave that was supposed to engulf Washington D.C. Was not even a red trickle. It was more of a blue trickle. They increased the Senate, and I think the Republicans will take the House. But if so, it's by that much, very little. So I expect Democrats to do their thing. More inflation, more minimum wage, more unions, less free trade, more regulation, more antitrust. You know, the usual. More taxes. How could I forget taxes? And more government expenditures. So I don't know. As an Austrian, well, I guess as an economist, those are positive claims, not normative. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying that's what I expect. And I think you don't have to be an Austrian to expect that. I think most mainstream economists and most commentators would expect more democracy, or more, not more democracy, more democratic policy, sort of Bernie Sanders type AOC kind of policies will be strengthened. More environmentalism. How could I leave out environmentalism, left wing environmentalism? So those are the usual things that we can all expect. And we can also expect the usual results, namely less less economic welfare.
Did the midterm surprise you at all? Were you expecting the red wave?
Well, all the prognosticators said so, and they're the professionals in this. And it's strange that they're all wrong. One wonders, well, how much chicanery occurred. I mean, you don't have to be a MAGA Trumpite to suspect a little chicanery at the ballot box. We have these machines, and when you vote, you don't. If you're voting for Jones or Smith, it doesn't say Jones or Smith. It just gives some sort of I don't know, electronic thingy, and then you hand that in, and you don't know if the machine got it correct or not. I think we ought to go to the old-fashioned ballot, paper ballots, which can be counted and recounted, and also election day. It's supposed to be election day, not election month. Now, okay, soldiers on in foreign lands, fine. Let them, let them. Certainly, they should have a say in the election. But you get this ballot stuffing, and if you're sick or you have COVID, well, that was started in by the Democrats, and it's just a way of getting fraud involved in the vote.
Okay, so the Democrat measures will lead to what? We obviously are showing all the signs of quote recession, although of course I'm not sure what these words necessarily mean these days. But what might it look like on the economic front, I guess, in the next 4 years? I mean, there's so much stuff. It's such a dynamic time. So on the geopolitical front, there's lots of questions surrounding Europe. I guess today, two missiles, I believe, landed in Poland, which is a NATO member from, we're told at least, on the day which Russia, I guess, sent out nearly 100 missiles across Ukraine. We have had the FANGs, the so-called big tech companies out in Silicon Valley. They're laying off thousands upon thousands of workers. Now, I will say I know a lot of these workers, unfortunately. I work in these environments sometimes, and most of them are not very productive unless it's kind of determining which pronouns they want to use.
Well, that's very important. We have to know what pronouns to use and how many genders there are. There used to be two, but now I think there are 57, like Heinz's varieties. I didn't realize that some Russian missiles entered Poland. Well, Poland has been helping Ukraine. Uh, I won't say it's justified, but I would say it's certainly understandable. Look, suppose that the U.S. was having a war with Mexico, and rather with Brazil. Brazil was the bad guy, and somehow uh, instead of NATO, we had South American ADO, and we had the Cold War ended, and uh, the U.S. ended all of its military uh, contracts with other countries, and Brazil kept creeping up toward the up through Central America and up through Mexico, and you remember what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. You might have been too young to remember it, but you certainly know what happened. At that time, the U.S. had, I don't know, about 20 missiles around Russia, and Russia had the audacity to put one missile near us in Cuba, and the U.S. went apoplectic, and the U.S. had what do you call it around Cuba? What's the word I'm looking for? They surrounded Cuba.
An embargo or a blockade?
A blockade. A blockade is an act of war. The U.S. declared war in effect, and happily the Russians were sensible and they agreed to pull out. It could have been a nuclear war, but what should have happened when the Cold War was over is that not only should the Russians have disbanded their Warsaw Pact, but the U.S. should have disbanded the NATO pact, and there shouldn't be any pacts. Instead, NATO keeps creeping eastward. It's sort of as if Brazil was creeping upward toward the U.S. and then they had missiles in Mexico instead of in Cuba, and the U.S. was fighting Mexico, which would be similar to Russia fighting the Ukraine, and now Poland, which would be, I don't know, Japan was helping Mexico. Well, the U.S. would probably bomb Japan. We've done it once before. We could do it again. Would be the attitude, I think, of the U.S. defense. So you have to look at these things, I think, from the Martian point of view or from an objective point of view. And NATO keeps creeping eastward and involving all sorts of other countries, Finland, Sweden, Ukraine. Russia feels beleaguered and I don't know, put upon. And Russia is, I don't say they're justified, but I can readily understand what's going on there. And I think it's really the U.S.'s fault for not disbanding NATO or not ending or not leaving NATO, instead pushing eastward. So I'm not a real big fan of Poland for helping Ukraine. I'm not a big fan of Ukraine. The Ukrainians had a government 3 or 4 years ago that was democratically elected. It's as if Mexico had what do you call it, a government that was democratic elected and was friendly toward the U.S. And then Brazil, the bad Brazilians, I'm just making this up, overturned the Mexican government. Well, the Americans overturned the Ukrainian government and now made Ukrainian government an enemy of Russia. So what do you expect Russia to do? The Crimea used to be a part of Russia, and it's part of their port to allow their ships in and out. And the Ukrainians are seizing that. So I'm not really a big fan of the Ukraine. I'm much more of a fan of Russia. I know it sounds as if I'm unpatriotic, but I think I'm really being patriotic because what's in the U.S.'s best interest is not to have a nuclear war with Russia, God forbid.
So a lot of people might claim that you're being an apologist for Putin. What would you respond to that?
Well, I guess I am an apologist for Putin. I see his point of view. I mean, he sees people encircling him and blockading him and surrounding him. Look, just because I see his point, and it doesn't mean I like the Russian system. I think the U.S. system is much better. The Russians would be a lot more powerful if they adopted a little bit of laissez-faire capitalism like we have in the U.S. But their economy is in the doghouse. It's sort of like with China. China used to be hard to even feed the people under communism. And then, there was this movie, The Mouse That Roared, a wonderful movie where Peter Sellers played all the roles. And what happened was, what was it? It was the end of World War II, and there was this little country like Liechtenstein or Monaco, and the U.S. was giving all sorts of money to the people who lost the war, but Liechtenstein didn't fight, but they wanted money. So it wasn't Liechtenstein or Monaco; it was a made-up country for Peter Sellers. But so this little country declared war on the U.S., hoping to lose, and then the U.S. would give them money. But what happened is they won. They won the war, and the high point was the queen of this little country and the general, both played by Peter Sellers, and the queen was saying, "You idiot! You were supposed to lose the war. You're not supposed to beat the U.S." Well, that was the mouse that roared. Well, what was the mouse that roared in China? Hong Kong. Hong Kong was the mouse that roared, and when China took over Hong Kong really took over China in terms of making it more free enterprise, because Hong Kong was the most free enterprise place in the world, really. One of my books is on economic freedom of the various countries, and when Hong Kong was a country, it was the freest country in the whole world. And what they did is they got the Chinese to adopt the Hong Kong free enterprise system, and then China, I don't know, doubled, tripled, quadrupled its GDP. Now, unfortunately, China is going against this, so the mouse isn't roaring. But getting back to Russia, Russia would be a much more powerful country, much greater danger to us, in one sense, if they adopted laissez-faire capitalism. But as I say, look at it from the Martian point of view. We're attacking Russia. Russia's not attacking us. Russia's not sending the Warsaw Pact westward. Russia's not trying to get Italy and France and England into the Warsaw Pact. Imagine if Russia was trying to do that. And then Russia tried to get Canada and Mexico into the Warsaw Pact. What would the U.S. feel? Beleaguered. Well, that's how he feels.
You mentioned you covered a lot of ground there. I wanted to maybe talk about China briefly. Recently, we saw Xi basically consolidate power. There was a demonstration at a moment during, I guess, it's like a Continental Congress type thing, a convention, a communist convention there. I forget. I don't know what they call that. And apparently, right, we're told when the international press came in, he had the former leader of China escorted out, and it was quite a spectacle. And then there's reports that he's consolidating power within the Communist Party, and therefore in China, which includes, I guess, kind of pushing out business leaders. I guess business leaders kind of always had a understanding with the Chinese Communist Party, and now I think they're questioning what their standing is. The news today is out of Guangzhou. Residents revolt over oppressive COVID lockdowns in China's Guangzhou. There's other stories that are around a similar topic. Any thoughts on that?
Well, China's going to weaken itself if it starts denigrating business people and going against the Hong Kong system, namely of private property rights and free enterprise. China will weaken itself, and it'll be more like Russia. And I don't know. I guess I'm sort of ambivalent. On the one hand, China's a bad guy. They're taking over all sorts of places, and they're threatening. What's that place that they're threatening?
Well, I think it's a lot of places. So Japan recently, and then there was Hong Kong, of course, and Taiwan.
Taiwan. I'm getting senile. I can't remember names of places. Taiwan. I'm not really getting senile, but I'm getting forgetful. Taiwan. They're trying to get Taiwan back as one of the provinces of China, and Taiwan wants to stay seceded from China. And here I'm sort of on the Taiwanese side. I think China has no right to compel the Taiwanese to be part of China if they don't want to be, and they had no right to take over Hong Kong either. The British handed over Hong Kong to the China under the agreement that there'd be two systems, and for 99 years, and the Chinese abrogated that. So the Chinese are not really good guys, And now they're weakening themselves by taking over more the communist economics rather than the capitalist economics. So I'm sort of ambivalent. On the one hand, I favor capitalism. On the other hand, I don't favor economic growth for bad countries. And China is a bad country in a way that Russia isn't. I mean, there's a difference between Russia versus Ukraine and China versus Taiwan. I'm very much on the Russian side vis-a-vis Ukraine, but I'm very much on the Taiwanese side vis-a-vis China because I favor secession. And secession, or rather the free association, is one of the linchpins of libertarianism, along with the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading. I would say free association is maybe the third principle of libertarianism. And the Taiwanese want to be freely associated with whoever they want. They don't want to be freely associated as part of the Chinese country. They want to have their own country. And I think that Texas wants to secede also. There is a movement for Texas to secede, and I certainly favor that. I favor the right of anyone to secede from anyone else because that's what all that free association is.
Maryland Fund is latest pension to consider pulling back on China. That speaks to your comment that they will sort of start, I guess, declining, which goes against a lot of what the pundits are saying. So a lot of people are saying, oh, China is a rising superpower. We're going to live in a multipolar world, which quite frankly doesn't sound that bad compared to some of how this kind of unraveling currently. But can you speak more to your contrarian view that China is not a rising superpower, that it's becoming more authoritarian and that's going to undermine itself?
Right. Well, I mean, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard made the case that, and Friedrich Hayek, that if you have central planning, you have an irrational economy. You don't have like, should you use steel or platinum for railroad ties, for rails? Well, platinum is probably better, but it would be silly to use platinum because platinum is needed for other things. But the only way to tell is you have to have the prices of both. And if you have central planning, you have no prices. Now, happily, the Sears and Roebuck catalog was available to the Russians, so they had some inkling of what the prices were. And the same thing with the interest rate. If you don't have an interest, and the U.S. doesn't have much of an interest rate either with the Fed. If you don't have an interest rate, you don't know whether you should build a tunnel through the mountain or a road around the mountain. A road around the mountain is a lot cheaper, but for the next 100 years, people are going to be spending more money going around the mountain, whereas it's much cheaper to go right through the mountain. It cuts off many, many miles. Well, which is better? You have to have an interest rate, but they don't have any interest rate. If the government is dictating the interest rate, there's no interest rate based on buying and selling and renting and saving and investing. So yes, I think China will be making itself weaker by going back towards socialism. You'd think they'd understand that. I mean, you'd think they'd realize that 20, 30 years ago, they were wallowing in poverty. They adopted free enterprise and their economy just blossomed. They had that experience, and now they're turning their backs on that. What's with them? They're sort of weird people that they don't understand economics. You think they would understand it because they've experienced it. It's not just a theoretical textbook thing for the Chinese, but they've experienced it. So again, I'm ambivalent. On the one hand, I favor capitalism. On the other hand, I wouldn't want Nazi Germany to be more efficient. And the way to be more efficient is to adopt capitalism. So I'm sort of ambivalent on what I want for Nazi Germany or China, or not that I'm saying China's a Nazi German place, but the U.S. has, what is it, 800 military bases in about 120 countries, and they say that that's defense. Right now the NBA is in operation, the basketball, and when the other team has the ball, everyone yells defense, defense. Everyone knows what the difference is between defense and not defense. And somehow the U.S. is defense with 800 military bases. Imagine if, I don't know how many foreign military bases Russia has. I don't think any. China, I don't think any. You don't, unless you count Hong Kong as a foreign military base. Then okay, so they have one. Uh, and the U.S. is somehow the good guy here. No, we're the bad guy. We should we should adopt a Ron Paulian view that the military should be strong, but it should only be for defense. Namely, anyone comes over to our borders, we kick their butts. But nobody's coming. Well, I shouldn't say nobody coming to our borders, but at least military isn't coming to our borders. Our southern borders are open, but that's a different kind of initiative. It's not military.
Regarding Russia, Zelensky called the missiles landing in Poland a major escalation, and I guess the entire operations today across Poland, so Kyiv, etc., and I think even in Lviv, which is on the Polish border, but I might be wrong about that. Now, if you were inserted, let's say in you're the not the head of NATO because you would want to just dissolve yourself. So maybe let's say you are a advisor to the president of the United States of America. Like, how would you navigate this situation so as to maybe avert World War III?
If I were the president of the United States, what I would do is tell the Ukrainians not one more penny is coming to you, and you might as well make peace. And I would try to be friendly with Putin. I'm a Putin apologist, so he would be friendly with me. And I would say, let's cool this down. We don't want World War III. You guys don't want World War III. We're stopping to support Ukraine. Let's have some peace, and we're going to pull out of NATO, and you won't be under threat. So there's no need for you to have the war. So let's stop the war. I would tell Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, that the spigot is turned off, and no more help from anyone. And if Poland or other countries keep helping Ukraine, I would cut them off, boycott them in various ways. So I would adopt a sort of a Ron Paulian foreign policy. Where the U.S. could be a mentor and a judge, helping promote peace, and pull out all those 800 military bases out of 130 countries. I mean, there are only 200 countries. We're in more than half of the countries with military bases. So that's what I would do if I were the president or I was advising the president.
And what if Putin reposted to Dr. President Block? He was like, Dr. Block, President Block, I like your beard. And also, I really appreciate that because now I can expand my war and move further into Europe. How would you respond?
I would say, Mr. Putin, you're lying. You're not an expansionist. You're a victim of expansion. You're not moving toward Italy. You're not trying to take over Germany. This is a lie against you. You're a good guy, Mr. Putin. You don't want to expand. And by the way, if you want to have a better country, adopt free enterprise. Milton Friedman went everywhere. He was like a Johnny One Note, and I mean this as a compliment, not as a criticism. He went to China. He went to everywhere. And he made the mistake of going to Chile. And what did he say in Chile? What did he say in China? Free enterprise, private property rights. But the left hated him for helping Pinochet in Chile. Well, I would be a Milton Friedman type in this regard, a Johnny One Note, and I would go everywhere by Zoom and say, look, read Rothbard, read Mises, read Hayek. If you want to have a decent country, if you want to have prosperity, let's have some free enterprise. So that would be the way I would go as President Block. I like the sound of that. Vote for me. A chicken in every pot.
On that topic, you mentioned Ron Paul and Dr. Block, or President Block. So now the Republican Party has interesting dynamics. We're seeing a split between traditional, I guess, Republicans and the MAGA Republicans. And then there's also this sect, the Ron Paul Republicans, which is smaller but nonetheless there, kind of cozying up to the MAGA perhaps. Can you speak to this kind of split in the Republican Party and how libertarians should view it and what it might mean for the future of the U.S.?
Well, there's also the neocons, the warmongers, and they're horrible. And then there's the Mises Caucus, the Freedom Caucus, which are pretty good. Um, an interesting thing occurred with my buddy Mark Victor, in Arizona, and also Shane Hazel and Oliver in Georgia. These were libertarians who had more votes than the difference between the two major parties. And the Republicans were very unhappy with libertarians because we're the spoilers, and we're helping the Democrats. And there's some truth to that, because the Democrats are helping Mark Victor because they think rightly we libertarians take more votes away from the Republican than we do for the Democrat. So my view on that would be, look, Republicans, libertarians can be relied upon to get 1 to 2 to sometimes 3% of the vote. If you don't like it, deal with us. Don't give us the back of your hand every time we make us petition and have to sign all sorts of things to get on the ballot. Libertarians spend a lot of money on that. Cut that out, and let us run unopposed for the mayor of Duckburg, 300 people, and we will promise in turn not to be the spoilers in races that are important. And also, when it comes to running against Nancy Pelosi, namely very, very safe blue states, blue either Senate or congressional, don't run a Republican for 1 out of 20 or something like that. Just let a libertarian run against Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or AOC or some very safe seat. So, and there's precedent for this. In New York State, the Democratic Party looked upon the Liberal Party as junior partners. They were nice to them. They ran together. And also, the Republicans looked upon the Conservative Party as junior partners. So I would say to the Republicans, if you want to reduce the libertarian threat, instead of being nasty to us, be nice to us. Now, look, I can't speak for the Libertarian Party. I've been a libertarian, a member of the Libertarian Party ever since 1969. The federal party started in 71, but the New York State Party was in operation. And I ran for office for the Assembly of New York State. So I can't speak for the Libertarian Party, but I am a fan of the Libertarian Party, a member of the Libertarian Party. And I would say to Republicans that if you want to obviate this threat to you, the way to do it is to make some sort of arrangement, some sort of agreement, instead of just being nasty and criticizing us and saying we're weird or whatever it is. Yes, we diverge from you on some things, but we probably take more votes away from you than we take away from the Democrats, at least right now. During the Vietnam War, it was the opposite. We probably took more votes away from the Democrats because the Libertarians and the Democrats agreed to get out of Vietnam, and it was the Republicans that wanted to stay in there. But right now, with wokeism and cancellation and snowflakism, Libertarians are much closer to the Republican Party. And if the Republicans want to obviate our danger, let them make peace with us.
What are your thoughts on the country's sort of political layout currently as it's changed lately, with Florida now increasingly becoming Republican? And I think with also somewhat of a resurgence in the Republican Party, although I think that's really being undermined.
Well, there's not much of a resurgence in the Republican Party
There was
in the
potential
last.
for one. There was real potential for one, but I think it's been squandered.
Well, I think a lot of people blame Trump for worrying about the last presidential election and the MAGA stuff, and also the Republicans on abortion were weird. They were saying no abortions even for rape or incest or underage. A 12-year-old girl gets raped, and she's got to stay with the pregnancy. I mean, that was really extreme. On the other hand, the Democrats are pretty extreme. They were saying you can have an abortion of a baby who's 1 hour away from being born. You can kill the baby. That's infanticide. So they're both weird. And
And that very interesting points, and I totally agree. And it's like have some political tact. Trump, like there's just some decisions he could have made that maybe would have put him over the top in 2020, maybe. And then lately, so you mentioned the Republican point. I believe the Katie Hobbs, the new governor of Arizona, is was unable to define any sort of limits on abortion. Very extreme. And then you're talking about extremes, and then I think those are two. Oh, in Montana. So in Montana, the voters voted no on life-saving measures in the case of a failed abortion in Montana. And so people will come up with lots of reasons for that. I don't know if we do. It might have just been that the question was worded weird and people didn't even know what it meant.
well, I don't know about the Montana situation, but a compromise situation with which I'm associated is called evictionism. You're allowed to evict the baby at any time, but never to kill the baby. So if we adopted that, all babies in the third trimester would now be saved because they're viable outside the womb. That would be one way to go. Another way to go, the Jewish Talmudic vision is whenever the heart beats, and it starts beating at around 13, 14 weeks. And you can't, I mean, look, 13 weeks or 14 is 3 months. If you don't know that you need an abortion by 3 months, you better shape up. So that would be a much better compromise, much closer to the evictionist theory that I espouse. And I think whichever party adopts that would make a great headway. But both parties seem to be such extremists. We libertarians are moderates here. Usually we're the extremists, but here we're the moderates, and both parties are extreme crazy. To make a 12-year-old girl pregnant, rape victim, go through pregnancy is crazy, and to abort a baby who's 1 hour away from being born and you kill the baby, uh, they're both grotesque.
Here in Idaho, the third party candidate, independent Ammon Bundy, got 20% of the vote or just under that. And the incumbent Governor Brad Little received about 60% of the vote and he'll remain governor. Ammon Bundy, his part of his platform, at least in commercial format, was like to abolish all the taxes and all the welfare. Now that kind of pushed me away from him a little bit because I'm not looking to. Oh, and also in order for the other thing is in order for affordable housing would be to take back the land from the feds, of which is 60% of Idaho, which is 60% of Idaho. And I'm not quite looking forward to looking at going to war right now with the feds just yet. And then also, we did also vote here to change the Constitution after 100 plus years, 130 years, to state that instead of the governor only being able to call the legislature into session, the legislature could now call itself into session. So in the event of an emergency, the legislature can now call itself into session and perhaps nullify emergency orders, lockdown orders, stay-at-home orders, etc. And so now that's a big change in and of itself. So I kind of moderated my governor vote and considering there was also this on the ballot, which is quite a dramatic change. And I'm also a new resident here. All that to say is, what do you make of someone like Ammon Bundy getting upwards of 20% of the vote in Idaho as an independent?
God bless him. He sounds pretty libertarian to me. I don't know why he's not in the Libertarian Party, but the policy sounds great. No taxes or low taxes, and get rid of welfare. It sounds wonderful. It sounds very libertarian, and that's a gigantic amount. Now, Mark Victor was polling 15% in Arizona. He dropped out in favor of Masters, who lost, but so there's hope. I mean, a lot of times libertarians get 1 or 2 or 3% of the vote, but every once in a while there'll be 5 or 10%, and libertarians sometimes win a mayoral, become mayor of a small town or something like that. So I'm a fan of the Libertarian Party. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. I favor the Libertarian Party, and also the new administration of the Libertarian Party. I very much favor that, because the previous one was a little sort of leftish and I don't know, compromising too much with the left. The new one is much more traditionally libertarian. So this guy in Idaho, he ought to be enrolled in the Libertarian Party, as far as I can see, because he's very libertarian.
I believe 48% of Americans are now identified as independent. And
Wow.
and I think that might have informed his idea for running under the independent banner. And also he was kind of he was not well, clearly the Republican Party nominated Brad Little, the governor, the incumbent, and so he had to run as something other than Republican. So I think the 48% of Americans are independent might have led to him running under that moniker. So just with a little bit of time left, I did want to jump a little bit more into the economy now. There's a ton of headlines. We're going over headlines a lot because I've learned that's kind of what gets views, and that's very important. Uh, this is my retirement plan. So the 50 different gigs. No, I'm just kidding. So there's Bezos' warning on the economy. There's a ad market that's apparently worse than during the pandemic. That might also have to do with changing technological landscape. Wall Street bonuses have plunged 45%. Household debt is soaring. Wholesale inflation eases to 8%. There's predictions of coming deflation, and and then of course there's the crypto headlines. The BlockFi is preparing for a potential bankruptcy on the heels of the FTX collapse. $8 billion with Sam Bankman-Fried, who had donated $40 million to the Democrat Party in the midterm, had pledged $1 billion to the Democrat Party. He's gone bankrupt, $8 billion gone, customer funds, and he's still hanging out in the Bahamas, not losing any sleep. That's a direct quote from a New York Times article. So what do you make of all this put together?
Well, it used to be a recession was two quarters of negative growth, but we live in, new times where different people have different pronouns, and somehow they change what a recession is. But the economy doesn't know that. As far as the economy is concerned, we were in a recession. We had two quarters, one right after the other, of negative growth. Of course, you're going to have. Now we get into the Austrian business cycle theory. What happened was that the Fed artificially lowered the interest rate. And when the interest rate was artificially lowered by all sorts of government increases in the money stock, what this did is it led to malinvestments, investments that were not justified by the saving and investment decisions of the populace. And they kept pushing us into roundabout methods of production that were not justified by the savings of the people. It's as if it's as if corn and peas, the market wanted half corn and half peas. Fine. But the government kept subsidizing peas. So the farmers started growing peas and stopped growing corn. And the analogy breaks down a little bit, because they can't keep going. If they keep going, we get into hyperinflation. So they have to cut back. And now we're up to our armpits in peas, and we don't have enough corn. So of course there's misallocation. Only instead of at a given moment in time with the corn and the peas, there's a misallocation throughout time. Namely, we have too much heavy industry and not enough light industry, or too much roundabout methods of production and not enough consumer goods. So the government kept misallocating resources, and eventually they got to stop because of hyperinflation. And when they stop, then we have this crack up boom, and you have vast unemployment. And I hope and pray that we don't get back to 1935. Tom Woods wrote a very nice book about 1921, when we had a similar situation to what we had in 1929. Only in 1921, the government did nothing and allowed the market to solve itself. In 1929, they didn't allow that to occur. And I'm afraid that Biden is more of an FDR type guy than a policy that was followed in 21. So again, if I were the economic advisor, Again, I'm a Johnny One Note. Not only should the U.S. get out of international chicanery, but the U.S. should get out of the Fed, out of central banking. Let's get back to the gold standard. And when I say gold standard, it doesn't have to be gold. It could be platinum this time. It could be silver. It could be what do they call it? I'm losing the word.
Palladium, silver, gold,
Bitcoin. Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
As I say, I'm getting senile. I couldn't think of the word Bitcoin. It could be Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is another free enterprise money. It's just that whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold. Milton Friedman, who I've complimented, now I have to criticize, once had a show called Free to Choose. Well, whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold and sometimes silver. And yet he was an adamant opponent of the gold standard, which I really couldn't understand. He sort of followed Rothbard's law. Rothbard's law was people who were not Austro-libertarians specialize in what they're horrible in. Friedman was great on minimum wage, unions, occupational licensure, rent control, free trade. But what did he specialize in? Money, where he was horrible. And he also specialized in education with educational vouchers. No, we don't want educational vouchers. What we want is to privatize schools. Schools should be like shoes. You want schooling, go pay for it. And the poor get shoes. Well, the poor will get schooling too. So that would be my view on the economy. Again, Johnny One Note, free enterprise. If you want to have a good economy, whether to have growth or to stop business cycles or recessions or depressions, engage in laissez-faire capitalism.
Any other comments on current affairs today as you see them, whether from a historical perspective or otherwise? There's a lot going on. The 2020s are going to be off the charts and have been already. What is your perspective?
Well, let this be the last question because I'm sort of running out of steam here. But I think we've covered the waterfront. That I see dangers all over the place. And the solution to all these dangers, again, I'm sorry to be so boring, but I don't see anything other than non-interventionism abroad and non-interventionism domestically. Let's have some economic freedom.
We've had the honor of sitting down today with Dr. Walter Block. I'm going to say it again, preeminent economist, one of the leading minds today in Austrian economics, modern Austrian economics movement. Thank you so much, Dr. Block, for taking time to sit down with us today.
President Block, for the likes of you.
Dr. President Block.
Take care, and thanks for having me on your show again. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine, and thank you everyone for listening.